All right. Well, welcome everyone to this panel, 2022, where we are discussing alternative paths for careers for PhD and graduate students, alternatives to academia, which is really very important for a lot of different reasons, but definitely a hot topic as everybody is on the job marketplace looking for work. And the Committee on the Status of Graduate Students, we thought it was important to put together this panel because it's really more of where you fit in than I've graduated or I'm about to graduate and I must teach. We all have different skills, we all have different talents, and we have put together a panel that will be able to share experiences about their different talents and how they fit in sometimes to multiple jobs or have done multiple things along their career path. And so I just want to start this by saying to anyone who's viewing this session, think about fitting in where your skills and talents can be best utilized instead of, I've got to be a professor. Okay. So that's what this is all about. Before we begin, I want to introduce our panelists. I'll start with Analía Vidal. I hope I said the last name right. Did I?
Gómez Vidal.
Gómez Vidal. Okay.
Thank you.
PhD and CPC at the Inter-American Development Bank. And Dr. Gómez Vidal is a social science researcher and professional coach with over a decade of experience working in public and private institutions in international development, governance, and higher education. Her research work focuses on political economy and gender in Latin America and the Caribbean. Throughout her time in academia and academic adjacent institutions, she has taught and advised over 500 students at the undergraduate and graduate level in the United States and abroad. In her coaching practice, she combines her extensive advising and mentoring experience with her coaching skills to support students and professionals across fields in creating the life they envisioned for themselves and identifying the next steps in their journey. She holds a PhD in government and politics and an MA in government and politics for the University of Maryland, an MA in international studies, and a BA in economics from Universidad Torcuato de Tella in Argentina. So welcome, Analía. Our next panelist is Menna Demessie. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Menna Demessie.
Menna Demessie, okay. She is the Senior VP and Executive Director of Universal Music Group Task Force for Meaningful Change. Dr. Demessie leads the company's social justice initiatives for marginalized communities. Universal is the world's largest music company with record labels that include Motown, Interscope, Republic Records, Def Jam, and others. Dr. Demessie oversees the philanthropic efforts advancing race equity. As one of Billboard's top female music executives, Menna brings experience working with Congresswoman Barbara Lee as Senior VP of Policy Analysis and Research. She also worked at the Leadership Institute for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and founded their Policy Center for Racial Equity and Social Justice. Menna earned her PhD in Public Policy and Political Science from the University of Michigan, where she conducted the first and only research on the influence of African American congressional caucuses in the House of Representatives to U.S. African foreign policy. Dr. Demessie is an adjunct at the University of California, University of Michigan, and holds seats on various boards across the country. So welcome, Menna. Yazmin has not quite made it onto the panel. I hope she is able to make it. She's having some technical difficulties and she apologizes for the delay. but I will introduce her in case she's able to make it with us. Dr. Yazmin Trejo is a social science researcher at the U.S. Census. So Yazmin works as a bilingual social science researcher in the U.S. Census Bureau for behavioral science and methods. She is a member of the Language and Cross-Cultural Group. She holds a PhD in political science, an MA in survey research and Latin American studies from the University of Connecticut. And her expertise includes over a decade of leading projects on survey methodology, pre-testing, cognitive interviews, and usability testing, and communications research with a focus on historically undercounted populations. Her work in the 2020 Census Communications Campaign has been recognized as the recipient of 3 bronze medals, which is the highest honorary recognition awarded to a federal employee by the U.S. Census. And in 2020, she was elected to the Executive Council for the American Association for Public Opinion Research, which is AAPOR, AAPOR, and she led the Communications Committee. So Dr. Trejo also serves as a member of the Committee on the Status of Latinas and Latinos in the discipline at APSA, and she is a proud alumni of the American Association of University of Women. And her publications are many, and her research has been featured in the Census and in New York Times and in BYU Radio. So let's hope that she can make it to join us, because it would be wonderful.
I'm here.
Oh, yay. Hooray, hooray, hooray.
Thank
Great.
you.
I'm so glad you made it. Really glad you made it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And for Nathan Paxton, a member of the U.S. Senate Legislative Assistant, please introduce yourself. I do not have a bio on you.
Sure. I'll make this as short as we can. My name is Nathan Paxton. I am a legislative assistant in the office of Senator Angus King, independent of Maine. Briefly, education back. I have a BA from the University of California at Davis, an MPhil from the University of Cambridge, an MA from the University of California at Berkeley, and my PhD is in political science from Harvard University. I did IR and comparative and theory. I, after graduation, taught for about 6 years at American University here in DC. My research and other interests sort of led me in the direction of wanting to have some understanding of American politics. So I was an American Political Science Association congressional fellow, and did that in 2015 and 16. And that led me to discovering that I preferred working in Congress to working in academia. So I made the transition then and have been working in Congress. Like many of you, I am actually on a job search right now, although I continue to work in Congress. I'm looking for other things. So I understand the feelings there. And that is probably enough for now. We can talk more in the Q&A.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I love the fact that we are all just from such diverse backgrounds, because that helps our listeners and our viewers to really see that, you know, we all come from different places, and we all have found where we fit and continue to look to places where we fit. I want to start off by asking, I guess, Menna, about the evolution of your career, you know, the whole, the cycle of it. How did it evolve? Because hearing your story of how you've evolved to do the things you do may help one of the listeners to understand that, you know, things aren't always cut and dry. Like you do this and then you do that, and that's the end, that there's an evolution to the process. So please talk a little bit about your evolution.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's funny, actually, having Nathan introduce himself, because last because we actually, I think your hair got longer, but we worked together on the modernization of Congress, right? And so,
Yeah, we were on the selection panel
yes,
for congressional fellows about 3 weeks before the world shut down.
that's right.
You're one of the last people I saw and things I did before we all sort of were like, oh, there's a virus, let's stop. So yeah.
Exactly. No, it's just a great example of how, our worlds are interconnected. I always like to, well, first of all, I like to say I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But that being said, when you look at our resumes on paper, it really does look like we had it all figured out. And I love to demystify that because, I really had to grapple in grad school, especially at a place like Michigan, where there's, expectations as well as all the other universities we've gone through to enter into research or teaching. There are so many different paths. I've actually learned from the younger generation, where even if you're talking about, career paths or financial stability, the students we teach are finding multiple ways to access income. They're doing multiple things at once. And I came from the generation of a very traditional kind of expectation, as I think most of us have. What I learned, though, that even in the nature of my research, which was always kind of exploratory, all of my research was primary data and had a lot to do with my, personal background and the civic engagement I do on the side. So to me, it was a very natural evolution. And I feel very fortunate and lucky to be able to study professionally what I'm very passionate about personally. But there are, you still grapple even today, right? I haven't written a book, I've published, but, I have now gotten to a place where I'm very comfortable in the fact that I might not know what I'm going to do in the next 5 years. I had no idea before the pandemic that I was going to leave the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and take my talents to a music company, but it's a very natural gravitational pull for me because my work is invested in finding ways to bridge the gap in racial disparities. And the world has shifted not only because of the pandemic, but because of, instances of witnessing, racism up close and personal right across the nation. So we've even seen the private sector shift after the murder of George Floyd in recognizing the gaps that they have, right? And so I actually had to hear from my peers saying, hey, you've been doing this for like 20 years now, even though other folks are just getting hip to it, maybe there's a space there for you to help. And so I actually had to get myself into that mode to say, you know what, I'm in a very comfortable space that makes sense for me. And actually, there's a high demand. I always say this, there's a high demand for PhDs in Congress, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, for those who are interested in doing it. So the common thread between all of my career paths, and I'll end here, has stayed fairly similar. It's just the context and the environment has changed. And I've also gotten comfortable doing multiple things at once. I've been an adjunct since I was working for Congressman Barbara Lee during the APSA fellowship, and I still teach to this day. I publish, it's hard work. It's not always easy to do all these multiple things. Some things go fast, some things go slow. But the idea that multiple things can happen, I think is an important shift that hopefully is happening in academia. I think it's so important because the world actually needs our research, not just in theory, but also in practice, and not just to teach students, but to actually help the world get better. And I know saying that sounds really maybe progressive and not what we're supposed to do, but honestly, I think the world has shifted in ways that we actually have to recognize our obligation to help democracy work better, to help advance research in ways that students can take it into the real world and help solve problems. I think doing that is our responsibility, and that's my personal opinion. And it doesn't mean that it takes away from your ability to publish, teach students, stay in academia. You can basically do more than one thing. That's the bottom line. And so, your path will kind of take you where you're supposed to go, even if you don't have it all figured out. But that's the story for me. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Great. And I definitely have some follow-up questions to that. But let's move to Analía. Tell me a little bit about your journey, specifically, once you got the PhD, was teaching in academia the first thing you thought about? Yeah, that's really what the question is.
Yeah. So I think there are two things that sort of like shape my, like my trajectory. One is like what Menna was just saying about like you can be more than one thing. And the other one is the fact that everything about my experience in grad school and beyond has been shaped by the fact that I'm an international student and worker. And that from the moment that you get the letter of admission to a PhD program, all the way for the rest of your life, probably, is going to like determine a very different game than domestic students in whatever host country you study and work. And so in my case, when I was going into the program, I had never been attached too much, like too tightly to the idea of being in academia necessarily. I came with a very like pragmatic mindset of like, let's see what the opportunities are, and hoping that the PhD would allow me to grow in ways that, like I wouldn't do otherwise. And so when it came to thinking about my career development, I started early on. I think I started in my third year, maybe, just like starting to explore academic and non-academic options, and sort of like what I needed to do to be ready for that job market, knowing that it became harder and harder to succeed as an international student. And so because of that, when I think it was, at the beginning of my 6th year, I had secured the funding for a 6th year, but I knew that I had to like graduate and be done before that year ended. So I went into the academic and non-academic market at the same time. And the way that I thought about it, like going back to what you were saying about skills and talents and like where you fit in, I think it became very clear to me over time that I love teaching, I love mentoring and advising. Like that's something that I like feels fulfilling in every possible way. But at the same time, I couldn't see myself without doing any kind of research. And so that kind of like led me into weighing my options. And I was lucky enough that I was interviewing for academic institutions. And at the same time, I got this job offer to join the Inter-American Development Bank in a division for which I had no background. I joined in the water and sanitation division, knowing nothing about water and sanitation. But they were seeking those skills, of sort of like being able to write for multiple audiences. I had a background in journalism. I had, background in academic writing, reporting. I had worked for the IDB in a different division, which was also a big part of, like the networking efforts.
Right.
And so by the time that offer came in, like I had to weigh in between like a very teaching heavy load in academic institutions or a research position in the area where I lived, and personal and professional reasons like led me to choose that path, with the understanding that whatever I couldn't do during my 9 to 5 that I really loved in academia and I wanted to continue doing, I would still do it in some way. And I actually managed to, it's a lot of work, I'm not gonna lie, but I managed to continue, like with my academic research agenda in parallel to my 9 to 5 agenda, and to pursue my coaching certification as a way of finding ways of mentoring and advising outside of academia, even though like most of the people I work with come from an academic background. So that's my story, basically.
That's awesome. And that gives us a great perspective for our international students to understand the different dynamics and the different paths. And I think, what I key in mostly onto what you said is really the same thing that Menna was saying, that you followed your passion. You did not let go. You said, I've got to do research. I have to do, and you held on to that and you found a way. And I think that that's a thread that so far is running through, this whole discussion. Let's go to Yazmin. And I want to ask you about your evolution. The census is an area that we never think about it, you know, and it's so obvious. It's like the census is full of research and it's full of statistics, and it's such a wide open field, you know, it spans everything, gender and ethnicity and, you know, just everything. But for some reason, we just don't think about it. So my question to you is how did you find that opportunity? What led you, you know, to join the census?
Thank you, and it has been wonderful to listen to everybody's journeys too. Thank you for this opportunity. Sorry, I still have a lingering cold. So for the U.S. Census Bureau, I know that's, you know, an idea that doesn't come like as your priority, right, when you're looking for jobs. I was trained as everybody else to become a professor, right? So I had that in my spirit. I still have it in so many ways. When I was looking for jobs, I was looking for academic and non-academic jobs. But by the year that I graduated, 2015, I knew beforehand that the market was not doing good. I am a Latin Americanist. There were 4 positions. I come from the University of Connecticut. I was competing with people who, you know, come from other tier 1 universities. So I knew my reality. And then throughout my life, I have, you know, wear so many hats since I was growing up, seeing my mom. You know, I grew up in a house with a single mother, looking for and doing several jobs to make things happen. So I was used to that, seeing that the reality of the academia was what it was, and is still. I started thinking in other options. I was fortunate also to, when I was doing my PhD, instead of staying in my home department, I was working at the Roper Center for Public Opinion Research as a research assistant. So that opened for me like a different network, right? Like seeing journalists contacting us for requests, or other type, you know, practitioners, sometimes the government and whatnot. So I knew that world existed. Also, my husband is a political scientist, and he has always been a practitioner, and, you know, while completing his political science degree. So I knew there was a world beyond academia. One part of me was trying still to be in academia. So I basically started doing a lot of informational interviews. I wanted to explore the practitioner's world, and informational interviews opened, you know, many conversations with people who were doing this. When I moved to Washington, D.C., I had a Zero Network. I had, you know, to build it myself, reaching out to people from American University, like the places that were familiar to me. And then attending events. And in one of those events, I met one of my colleagues now at the census, who was a postdoc at the census. And he explained to me, he was very kindly explaining to me all the process for his application. And I knew that the Census Bureau had an agenda about institutional knowledge, what we know about the census and what that matters for people to participate in the census. And my dissertation is about census knowledge and the gender gap in political science. So I was just very excited to see that connection. I submitted my application to the census, but also for an opportunity to participate in or to apply into a program for students who want to be trained or recent PhD you know, holders who want to become part of the nonprofit world. So I was, you know, looking for jobs, academia, then nonprofit, and then the government, presidential management fellows in the government, the U.S. Census Bureau, I was also considering applying for a fellowship in the White House, like all the fellowship programs that I was learning about. So I got selected to both a nonprofit program in the, I can send the link, but it's ACLU, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. But yeah, but if your dissertation is related to gender, race, and ethnicity, you can apply. They train you to become and especially on the nonprofit world. So I got selected to both positions, and I decided for the census. And working at the census has been a game changer for me. And basically, grad school was a very isolated process for me. You know, I didn't, for publications, everybody worked in their own thing. But in the census, I found a team, collaborations. In the area where I work on is still very academic oriented, research oriented, which is a privilege. And I still get to publish. And basically the first project that I was able to advance was related to census knowledge among Hispanics. And I'll stop there.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Awesome. And really, you know, to hear about a different journey. That's the wonderful thing about this panel, is that you all are so different, you know, and it's wonderful to hear those differences because people in the audience are all different and they're looking to relate to one of your stories or to a part of your story. And so thank you for sharing that. It's just really great information. Okay, and now let's turn to Nathan. And Nathan, I'd like to hear about the evolution of your journey, which really sounds very colorful. It sounds like, you know, you're really bridging the gap, you know, from these two different worlds, from, you know, Congress.
I did that program too. Yeah, and I've got, if people are interested, I have some slides I put up on how to do informational interviewing and what it is. A few of us have mentioned it. At least here in the DC world, it's a super common thing.
Would you like to show that after you explain a little bit?
Yeah, I'll tell a little bit about me, and then I'll just share that. I can run through that pretty quickly.
Okay, great.
And we'll talk about it. I went to graduate school in the aughts. I got the very traditional way of looking at it, that like, you are training to be an academic, you must get a tenure track job, because that is what we do in this. This is professional school for professors. You know, I had interactions with at least one member of my committee who claimed that said member would not look any worse on me if I went into government jobs or did other things, because I was doing other stuff outside of my research and wasn't going as fast as they would have liked me to. And so, you know, maybe I should look into working other sorts of jobs, but not like academia jobs. And then I became the trailing spouse. My husband got a job here in the DC area about a few months before I actually ended up finishing. And so we commuted for a year and a half because, again, I was told that, you know, if you're in the same time zone, you're pretty lucky. And we were in the same time zone. So eventually those jobs that I had right after graduate school ran out. I moved down here and was unemployed. This was during the recession of 2008 to 2010. It was a glorious time to be on the academic market, you know, and looking for jobs, especially when you're like, well, I rather enjoy living with the person that I love, and how far away should I go from this person? I ended up actually securing a non-tenure track but full-time job at American University, where what they call them are term faculty. And AU, like many universities all over the country, has moved more toward that model where there are, in essence, teaching faculty who do a higher load of teaching but are not expected to do research and all. I did that for about 6 years. It was fine. I learned in the course of that though there are elements of teaching I love, and I have gone back to do teaching there, I don't want to do teaching full time. And I certainly don't want to make the money that teaching pays. One thing I would like to point out to everyone here, I certainly imbibed the idea that academia is a monastic profession of vocation, and we do it for the love of the profession, and that money is really irrelevant. Now, of course, I heard this from professors at Harvard who were making over $200,000 a year, so money was irrelevant to them. Um, when I left AU in 2016, I was making $53,000 a year, which I decided was just insufficient. I wanted to make more. Um, so one of the reasons I left academia was in large part because I didn't want to do that work anymore as a full-time gig. And the parts I loved did not make up for the parts I really did not love. One of the other reasons was honestly, I live in DC, and it is not easy to live on $53,000 a year here, even if you're in a dual income couple. A friend of mine actually asked at one point, how do the two of you live on Capitol Hill? This was 8 years ago or whatever, and only make $120,000 and all that. And I'm like, I don't know, but somehow we're doing it. So I want to tell you, it is perfectly okay at some point to say yeah, money is a thing that's all right. It doesn't mean I need to become a finance bro. If some of you were finance bros or gals, no aspersions really cast, but you're not looking to make $500,000. Maybe you're just looking to make the high five or low six figures. And that's perfectly acceptable to say that academia doesn't pay what you need it to pay to live the life that you'd like to. So, I ended up doing the APSA Congressional Fellowship. I really loved it. I enjoyed the experience thoroughly, and realized that one, American politics was not as bad as I had thought it was, because I'm an IR person, and of course we look at people who study American and just recoil, as Americanists do to us in IR. But also that I liked that work, and it felt more collaborative, and I felt like even in the US Senate, I was sort of doing more and more interested and engaged in the work. So I was able to take the office that had hired me, and they decided that I could do some stuff for them, especially as my boss was going into a re-election cycle. I went back to AU for a little while and taught, but they came back and said, hey, we'd like to hire you as a legislative assistant. I've been there since. I was starting to get ready to look around right when the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit. And given my expertise is in global health and global health security, it felt like a good time to stay in government and try to do my tiny little piece there to work the problem from inside of Congress. So that's my journey, and I can do the slides now, or if we I think we have maybe one other
slides.
person.
Let's do the slides, Lee. I've got some questions that are going to lead up right to the slides. So let's hang on. We're going to do them a little bit later. But thank you so much for bringing up the money issue, because that is really important. That's something, if you're a legislative assistant, if you could push whoever you're working for to try and boost up teacher salaries, that would be great. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I think that a lot of our viewers and listeners can relate to, going through the PhD process and thinking, okay, this is a teacher making machine, and that's what you're supposed to do. And then afterwards, it's like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'll try to do that. In other words, I'll try and see if that's where I fit. But maybe that's not the place.
And I think for looking at sort of the institutions where people were or are, and maybe some of the ones that people are at. I mean, I was very active. I enjoyed working with undergraduates when I was a graduate student. I was actively discouraged from spending too much time with undergraduates as a graduate student, because teaching was a lesser activity, at least in the minds of some faculty. And so there may be some people out there who are like, I really love teaching and maybe don't love the research as much. And you know, there are paths off the academic world route for those people also.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I want to turn and I want to talk a little bit about networking, right? You know, we're all in some graduate program, and you know, you may have started networking. Some of you started right at the very beginning. Some of you took a little bit longer and decided, okay, I'm going to look for this fellowship. But let's talk about networking and you know, some of the ways that are beneficial in doing it, some of the ways that are not so great, and some of the ways that are fruitful. That's really where we want to focus on. And so I'm going to open it up and you know, let whoever wants to speak first just dive in and let's talk about the networking. Best practices.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, that's great, Yazmin.
I think one of the things, and this is so helpful, because one of the things that, as Menna also pointed out, you also, Angela, is that this is not a straightforward process. For me to get to the census, it took 2 years. And I would say for networking, first listen to yourself, listen to your approach. I am an introverted person, so I need to do my networking in a different way. And I also, so for example, I set goals, you know, weekly or monthly of how many people I want to connect with. And that is helpful. I try to follow those goals. If I am feeling overwhelmed, I change it, because when you are reaching out to people, 2 things generally happen. Some of them are super kind, and they immediately open, you know, the door for a conversation, or 3 things. So the other type of person never answers, and people who are willing to connect with you, but they are just generally not really nice. And you are wondering, why did you in the first place accept, you know, a conversation for this? So, you know, just be prepared for the ride. Those 3 things can happen. It's not you, it's just, you know, whatever is happening in their lives, and just continue moving on. For informational interviews, so, you know, open conversations, courageous conversations, I also call them like that, have questions prepared in advance. That helps to start the conversation, you know, see what is the journey of the person. I like to start by asking about their trajectory professionally, and, you know, if they have general recommendations for people. And I still do it to this day. Like, you never stop, because as Menna said, like, you keep looking for, you keep your eyes open, right, for other opportunities, and also learning from peers. For me, at least from the leadership side, you know, being an immigrant from Mexico, that I am seeing, I bring a persona to my job, I bring a persona to my professional setting, and I need to work a lot on my leadership style, and talking to other leaders helps me a lot. And then finally, another piece of advice for informational interviews, just follow up, you know, express your gratitude. You never know. I seen like so many people that I have connected with 3-4 years ago. They were students, and now they are, you know, happily in job positions, and they write to me, and it's just very nice to have that connection. I'll stop there.
That's great. Great advice. Anybody else want to jump in on networking?
Yeah, I'll say, so I second everything that Yazmin just said. I'll say also, like, from international student worker perspective, like, this is essential. I cannot, like, I lost count of how many times I went through interviewing processes where, like, it's much harder because they're not willing to sponsor. And so, like, having someone, an ally or an advocate there, it's like that much important for you. also, I kind of like, it caught my attention, like as Nathan, I'm also like constantly in the job market now. And so like that becomes like a pillar in part of like the job searching strategy. That being said, I think it's very important, and I think it goes in line with everything that we've been talking about so far. What Yazmin was saying about, like becoming self-aware about what you need, like whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, like what you feel more comfortable with. I think overall the message is like, we are not necessarily taught in grad school how to get to know ourselves and sort of like set the parameters for what makes us happy, whether that is, teaching or research, how to approach networking and so on and so forth. And so like, I think like that becomes a key message for networking too, because at the end of the day, you're trying to, create bonds and foster connection with other person. And how you show up is part of that. And so in that regard, one suggestion that I have is, like make sure that you are getting to know that person more so than, like guiding yourself by the title that you see on the page. Because like it has happened to me, like people who have reached out and like are interested in one specific aspect of my career, and we talk about it, and we discuss ways for them to pursue their own path. And there are people who, just like care about like the cut and dry, but not follow up. And so like, then it's harder for you to feel connected to them in a way that you want to like really invest the time and effort to advocate for them.
Right.
In a similar way, one thing that I always say is LinkedIn is a great tool. I love it. That being said, I highly suggest that whenever you reach out to someone, do not just connect with them without introducing yourself, like sending a message, wanting to sort of like interact with them beforehand. People have different ways of approaching LinkedIn. I try not to connect with anyone that I don't know. And so like that requires a certain level of like getting to know the other person so that you can ultimately invest in that relationship over time, which is part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop into just quickly because
Please
I really
do.
like this question, and for those joining and tuning in, and I completely agree with everything that has been said. The value of social capital cannot be underestimated. It's something you're not going to get like in grad school. You really got to just, and I'm just going to keep it real. You got to move all that noise from your committees and from your classmates, and the idea that you have to, because really you're spending a lot of time, and it's a psychological thing. You're spending a lot of time saying like, what do people expect me to do, and versus what I want to do. And so number one, you have to put yourself in spaces outside of other academics like you. Get out there, do something different, and don't be scared to do that. You have to build a network, because you can be the smartest person in your field, but if you don't know anybody, it's going to be very hard for you to get to where you want to go. The other thing is you need affirmation that these other spaces that you're being drawn to are actually, they want you just as much as you want them. I mean, how many political scientists are in the music industry? I mean, I don't know, not many, right? But people helped me, and I have no shame in saying that. I would not be where I was if I did not have a very strong social capital network. Nathan and I know this well. In Congress, even to get policy done, you got to know people. Members of Congress have to know people. It's not just how they vote on the floor. In order to get their policy agenda done, they have to network among their own colleagues. So, a lot of this is demystifying and really identifying, like, colleges and universities are also shifting. And I went to Michigan because they offered a joint PhD program in public policy and political science. And Nathan and I have done the APSA fellowship, and 95% of those people catch Potomac fever and never go into academia thereafter. And so you just have to be comfortable in that space. It's real psychological. I'm going to drop, and I've shared this with so many other people too, this TED Talk by a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Mehret Mandefro. She went to Harvard Medical School. She's a medical doctor turned filmmaker, and she has this whole talk about the concept of fear adorned with love. And it's basically how, she went to Harvard Med School. She was a White House fellow. The expectation was that she would be a practicing medical doctor and professor at GW, but that wasn't where her heart was. So she shifted gears to filmmakers, and all the people who loved her mentors, her committees, they said, what the hell are you doing? You're a medical doctor, filmmaker, like that's not you. And now she has, an award-winning film called Diffred on Netflix that was executive produced by Angelina Jolie. She lives in Ethiopia. She's married with 3 kids, living her best life ever. And so the point is, she talks about the people who are closest to you, because they actually believe in you. They are, and they want you to be successful. So when you start ideating about the other things you want to do that are outside of the path, they actually start to, in good faith, but unfortunately, like they're scared for you. So you start to go in this other path. So you got to really take that noise out. And I really appreciate Nathan's comments about financial stability. I think being entrepreneurial, if I could go back, I would be more entrepreneurial about my PhD. And what that means is that, obviously research and teaching are always going to be there. You can do that too. But the other thing is, think about your passion points and how you could be a director of a policy center, or how you can do all these jobs that folks are doing. There's so much out there. You will get paid a lot of money for it. And what you like, you'll be great at. And you can always, and here's the great thing about a PhD, there's enough universities across the globe that you will always have a job in teaching if you really want it. It'll always be there. What may not always be there are the opportunities for you to actually pursue these alternative paths. And so I just want you all to know college and universities are changing, even in terms of what they're offering. But you need to take yourself out. Go to don't just go to APSA conference. I love APSA. I'm a council member on the APSA council, but you really need to get out there and be the 1 or 2 like of your own political scientists with other policy people or government people. Go out there and see, and you'll realize that there's a high demand for your expertise. It feels good, but you are going to have to meet people. And a great place to start is with all these people on this call. We're all willing to communicate with you. We all know a lot of people, and you can start there. But it's really a psychological thing. But do not underestimate you've got all the credentials covered. So you're going to be successful, right? It's more about get a PhD in likability, and get a PhD in social capital, get a PhD in being able to network, do that part, and you'll be good. So I'm going to drop the chat in here. This is really great when you get a chance to watch, her talk. I think it's very relatable.
Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Super, super awesome. Anything to add to that? Anybody? Nope. Okay, I just want to highlight some of the things that with this networking, whether you're an introvert or whether you're an extrovert, there are ways that you still can and must approach networking, because obviously you're getting nowhere by just getting your PhD and then you have no one to help you get to where you need to go. One thing I want to add to that is that friends like hanging with friends. Friends like working with friends. Friends like supporting with friends. And it's a natural human phenomenon. We like relationships. We like to know who we're working with. We like to know who we're rooting for. We like to lift up others if we can, but we need to get to know them. And so that's one of the things that we often forget. We think that maybe our resume is going to say it all. Well, yeah, your resume, may say a lot, but there's still that human connection. And so that's one thing that I'm finding through hearing what you all are saying, is that there's that human connection that's needed, which is actually a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that humans still need to connect, to see your eyes, to see your face, to have dialogue with you, to know who you are. And when they know who you are, then typically, they're willing to help. unless there's 1,000 things going on in their lifetime and they just, you know, they just can't handle it. And so know that networking is not, you know, don't think of it as a job, you know, think of it as a way to connect with others who will give you a leg up along the way. Analía.
As you were saying that, something came to my mind that I think it's important, you know, in terms of like connecting and community. So one thing that I notice like often is like when students reach out, we have this tendency, I've done it myself while I was in grad school, of like introducing ourselves through our dissertation. Like, this is what I'm doing, right? And it's so hard sometimes to like break from that pattern. And I think part of that, like in my experience, what happened is like grad school brought me to the US. And so that meant I had no community at the very beginning. And so like grad school community was my only community. But over time, going to what you were just saying, I needed to sort of like break from that bubble and sort of like understand my sense of self outside of grad school to complement and to understand, you know, like what I wanted to do later on. And that's when I think like the importance of hobbies and activities that you do completely outside of your work or your research are very important. In my case, like I am completely indebted to the improv community in the Washington, D.C. area. Like for the past 6 years, they have been such a big community and source of connection and support throughout the PhD, even if people had nothing to do with the research or the experience themselves. And so I think that that's another way in which, you know, like discovering yourself and supporting yourself and your well-being, like, you know, like in a more holistic way, really can translate into a better quality of life and like opportunities down the line.
Yes, agreed. And, you know, on that matter of this holistic journey, you know, we forget about different aspects of ourselves. And I teach a professional development class. It only happens in the spring, but it's for students who are here in DC, who are, you know, doing research or working on the Hill or working in some manner. And then they add the professional development portion of it in the spring. And one of the books that I use talks about how each of us have 5 of us within one, right? Meaning that we could do 5 different things, right? Which is wonderful to see in actuality, you know, on the panel. You guys are basically made up of at least 5 different aspects of yourself. And so when I asked the question about evolution, it was great to hear about those 5 different yous within you. And so coming from a holistic point of view, knowing that you've got these different things in you, these different passions, these different routes, different things that you want to do, that you want to accomplish while you are on this earth. You know, as Menna said, it's okay. It's okay to switch gears. You know, and as Nathan said, one of those 5 of you wants money, right? One of them maybe want to teach and be okay with $50,000, but the other one says, no, I want $150,000 or I want $250,000. And so that's okay as well. It's fine to go into these different areas because I noticed that Menna mentioned she follows her passion, and where her passion lies, boom, that's where she goes. And so when we talk about research and we talk about our PhDs and things like that, a lot of students do secondary research, which is fine, you know, but don't be afraid to get out and do primary research. When you do primary research, you're already tapping into a network. You're already tapping into a network of others who are interested in what you do or maybe working with you. I want to ask, I guess I will ask Nathan and Yazmin about organizations. APSA is a great organization. Are there other organizations that perhaps give free lectures, free seminars that that you have frequented or that you know about, or as physical places to go to network?
I can go first, Yazmin, or you can go either way. Okay. So I tend to network in a more one-on-one or one-on-two style. I'm not quite your classic introvert. I like getting up and performing, and then I find it utterly exhausted and need to go take a nap afterward. So when I network, it tends to be, and the reason I had thought through and so forth on this idea of informational interviewing is that I often want to get to know one or two people. That's much more in my comfort level. And, I have a genuine interest in sometimes how people got to where they are. The joke about at least Washington, D.C. is that the most common opening question that people have here is, well, what do you do? And it's because everyone is supposedly on the make for their next job. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I'm interested in sort of a lot of times just how people, because of the fact that I had to go through my own process of figuring out what is it I want to do. If I do get around at some point to writing a book, one of them may be about how is it that people sort of put together their journey, for lack of a better word. I'm interested sort of just in hearing like, well, how did you get from where you went to college to what you do now? And some people's paths are pretty linear. One thing I've learned in DC is that many people will just say, oh, well, my path is not the same. It's very different than everyone else's. Everyone here is sort of special. So in terms of physical spaces, a lot of what I do is I arrange coffees and come and try to talk to people about the work that they're doing, about the organization that they're in. I would say that outside of that, some of the networking that I've done has come through spaces I was involved in on the academic side. So I've adjuncted at Georgetown now, and I've met a few faculty there. And it being a DC university, people often have, the other adjuncts have other jobs. So I've had a chance to meet a couple people I would not have just through the course of teaching and doing that work. I think if you're outside, so in my context on the Hill, it's very hard to get off the Hill when we're in session. I didn't read, but I saw that Menna suggests, some of the think tanks do have ongoing seminar series. Some of the universities have ongoing seminar series. I remember when I was faculty, I would go to GW, for example, and people from the State Department and USAID would attend some of the seminars in the Elliott School because it's basically across the street from them. Right. So there are often those. And when I was unemployed and pretty new at AU, I was going to some of those seminars just as a way to meet people, but also just to sort of keep up with what was going on in the discipline. In the context in which I am now, one, it's a little hard to remember because it's been 2.5 years since we've done a lot of this stuff. But in my job, a lot of people and organizations come to us on the Hill, and they come and talk to us. So I often, there are often lunches put on by various institutes, whether they be think tanks or places like Rand Corporation. Hoover Institution has an amazing set of seminars that they do for congressional staffers. And so a lot of it comes through the course of the job that I do. And I would say that I don't have a lot of specific things except that I'm lucky in that where I work, people want to come and talk to us and try to tell us about how the world works. And so I can usually get a lot of it that way. I do know that people in the executive branch often have similar opportunities, but they're able to go to some of the stuff in the downtown area where it's a little easier for them to access. If you don't know the geography of DC, Capitol Hill is sort of displaced from the executive branch by physical location. It takes a bit of a taxi ride or whatever to get yourself off the Hill. And it's generally hard to do Monday through Thursday.
Yeah. Yazmin, how did you go to physical locations, or were they phone calls, or how did you actually network?
So now with the pandemic, so many things have changed. Before I was physically in events, attending workshops, conferences and whatnot. But now it's mainly online because you have, of course, many people teleworking, but also you have people who are still, not feeling comfortable meeting in person, or, people who have to protect family members. So, being respectful of that, I think most of the action is happening online, and people are getting used to that. And some of the organizations that I am thinking, especially for students, start very locally. Like, who is your faculty member who used to be a practitioner, or a faculty member who has connections with practitioners, right? I was very lucky. One of my dissertation advisors used to work at the United Nations, and she's like a networking power force, right? So I learned so much from her, how to write a message, how to, connect with people, how to follow up. So just start very locally, also start looking at the local chapters. For example, I know the American Association for Public Opinion Research has local chapters. So you can also go to them. Usually the executive director is selected, very approachable, or, if you are interested on talking to people on the communication area, or, the diversity committee efforts and whatnot, they are usually very, very approachable. I would say also, again, depending on where do you want to land, if you have already an organization in mind, a type of job that you would like to do, start also thinking about the people who already hold those jobs or who work within that organization, and try to reach out to them, or think about people who may be connected to them. Local universities. I remember when I was looking for jobs, I attended one of the early virtual workshops from American University, the Institute for Latino Studies. And that's how I learned. They mentioned they had a fellows program. And I was like, and then I looked, there was not like an official call. So I contacted the director. And that's how I got to meet Eric, and we had a conversation. I had to do a presentation and apply to the program. And I was able to write part of my dissertation as a fellow there. And also think on your network, think on your family, what networks are already at reach to you, on your peers also. Like I am first generation for my PhD, but usually many of my colleagues, their parents had already a PhD or have a network built. So think also on them. That's my advice.
Awesome. Menna, I want to turn to you and ask you, I'm looking at your information in the chat. So yes, CSIS used to have fabulous lectures. And I'm turning to you to find out if you have any advice for the lack of those, like they haven't started back up, and so a lot of places where you could always just pop over to here, you could pop to the Wilson Center, or, whatever, and attend, they haven't started them up. And so it feels for, this current generation of graduate students and PhD students that they're losing their opportunities to make these personal connections. And so I'm turning to you to see if you have any advice or what your thoughts are about building relationships via internet, via LinkedIn, or
The silver lining, and I hope I'm kind of going in and out of internet, so hopefully I'll make this brief, but the silver lining is we're all living in the same moment. And so if we've learned anything about technology, yes, it has kind of impeded the ability for kind of a very like authentic human interaction. At the same time, it has expanded your network globally. So, you have to really think about taking advantage of the current context we're in, which allows you to actually be more global in terms of your ability to connect to people. It would be a lot harder if it was only you that had the internet to communicate with each other and everyone else was doing it in person. So, don't worry about that part. The main thing is really thinking outside of the box. And honestly, taking the advice, like I'm really good at telling other people what to do. Like I'm still trying to do the same things, right? Like I tell my students all the time when they come to DC and they want to, lock in a job at CSIS or any of the think tanks I mentioned there, or they're looking for a job, but the job they want is not posted. And so they say, well, what do I do about that? And I'm like, if you only wait around for a job posting to contact somebody, you've already lost the game. You have to actually be very innovative. And first of all, do your homework. And I tell students all the time, it's not just about going up to someone and saying, hey, can we have coffee sometime? No, because those people are busy and they have things to do. But if you go to that same person and say, hey, so-and-so, I see that you're, the principal investigator on this longitudinal study on the census. And, I was really interested, to get to learn more. And if there are opportunities, I'd love, right. Like come having done your homework. People love talking about themselves and their story. And then make an appointment with, that person and make them feel good, make them know that you've done your homework. And there might not be a job there, but if you can make that connection individually, and I'll be real, like even with University of Michigan, I was headed to law school. I did not know a lot about political science. But actually I went to Oberlin College in Ohio, and my friend, because I played basketball in college, she ended up being the first African-American to graduate with her PhD, her joint PhD in economics and public policy from the University of Michigan. My best friend who I played basketball with. And she told me, Menna, you've always loved politics. They have this great program in political science at Michigan. Had no idea. I knew about the law school. I applied twice to get into Michigan's law school and I got rejected twice. And so I only knew about the business school and the law school, did not know that Michigan had the #1 American political science program in the country. But I lived in Ohio. I drove up, stayed at the weekend with my friend, and I set up all these meetings with people like Professor Mary Corcoran, who's founded the joint program at University of Michigan, Scott Page, who's a very well-known, statistical professor, and so many other professors at the university. And basically, I wasn't part of any tour program or anything. And I was able to, I did my homework and I brought my resume and I approached every meeting as if it was an informal or formal interview. And I know that trip made me kind of stand out from everyone else and all the 500 some other applications they got for that program. So, had it not been for me just taking a weekend on my own, now sometimes we can't do that because, going back to Angela's question, it's like, how do you do that now? But what you want to do is be different and take pride in being different. You don't want to try to connect to someone just because a job is available, because there's thousands of other people doing that. What you want to do is, if you want to work for the census, reach out to Yazmin now. Reach out when there is, if it's a place that you want to explore. Don't wait for a job opportunity. Go send a personalized email. Be cautious about how even your subject heading. Some of these people get, Nathan's getting, I don't know how many hundreds of emails from across the country. So, and I'm on the APSA fellowship.
I get like 300 emails a day, just so you know. If
Right.
any of you email me, that's fine. But like, I get a lot of emails. So
Right.
yeah, I mean,
So
we're all done.
Right. And that you have to be pragmatic. So some of the advice that I and my colleagues that are on the APSA Congressional Fellowship Council, we even say, when you're trying to get a job with a member of Congress, and these folks got PhDs, they're smart as hell and everything, but sometimes the very basic steps to make connections are lost, right? Like we tell them in the subject heading, put, unpaid legislative, aid, you got to flag all of those things matter, right? Go ahead, Nathan.
I was gonna say, When I was an APSA fellow, I just had a hard time. I had interviews with offices, but just I couldn't get a lot of people to sort of be interested in me, And I think partially it was sort of some of the way that I was presenting, partially also like it was a lack of a hook. The office that I'm in now, I was a fellow for them, and I think one of the reasons that they even sort of looked a little deeper and didn't just sort of say, oh, free labor or whatever, do we know if we want him or not? My dean emeritus at AU had known the senator in college. They were college friends. And so he just said, oh, just mention in your letter that you know me. And so I was like, your college friend and fraternity brother, so-and-so, da-da-da-da. Now, did Senator King ever read that? No, probably not. But the chief of staff and the ledge director did. And they're like, oh, this guy's got a connection. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be anything like that, but if you've got any sort of connection like that when you're doing it, I always say, bring it in and tell me. If like we know someone in common, yeah, great. Like that, on some level, that helps as a filter. And what I can do is if some of you know Menna, and you say, oh, I know her, I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll mail her up and be like, hey, this person, da-da-da-da, give me a little background just so I can do this best for them. But it also serves as a sort of way of like, you're not just sort of, even if you're random coming over the transom, I'll try, but I'm going to go a little extra step if I know that like there's just something there. So look, if you don't have that, fine. It can still work. But if you've got those things, don't be shy about mentioning that like, oh, I know this person that you know, and they suggested we talk. Right. Or we know each other together. It's a valuable piece of social capital, knowing that we have a network in common.
Awesome. Awesome. Why don't we segue from that point, Nathan, to your slides? Why don't you go ahead and show us the information interview slides? Because I think this leads into it nicely.
All right. Let's see what I can get done here. It always feels like the edge of breaking everything down if I don't get this quite right.
And I would just, while he's getting that prepared, if anybody has questions, you can drop them in the chat too. We can answer them.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think you all can see this. Let's confirm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is pretty quick, and I have a citation for it at the end because should always cite appropriately. But I just want to talk a little bit about what informational interviewing is, because we talk about it all the time. In essence, it's a lot of like what you've seen us do here today. It's about asking a person what they do, how they got to where they are in their career, and so forth. And I'll give you some questions you can ask or foci for that in a minute. It's not a job interview, though. You are not trying out to get a job in that person's organization. What you're there is to learn. I figure in informational interviewing, I do less of the talking by far. In a conventional job interview, you as the person would do most of it. In an informational interview, it's very much the opposite. You are asking them to share their knowledge, but you're also working to create a connection with that person, to see what similarities you have, what differences, to ask their advice. And people like doing this, amazingly. It's sort of surprising, but like I think most people that I've done informational interviews with on either side, I think both parties generally like it. But you should just realize that like this is much more like an interview you would conduct for your research project, where you're there to listen and gather information, than an interview where you're showing yourself off. What you're trying to do is learn how a person's choices led them to the work they are doing now. And it really is an example of sort of convergent evolution. You're trying to see how different pathways in life can bring people to similar places. The usual example in evolutionary biology of convergent evolution is flight. You have birds, you had pterosaurs, you have bats and other mammals. They all fly, but they didn't all come from the same place. They all sort of started in different places and came back so that they could fly. A lot of people in DC will say, work on the Hill or work for an executive agency or so forth, but they often got there in very different ways. And so what is really cool about informational interviewing is it gives you the chance to see that like, oh, Well, Yazmin works at the census, but there's not just one way to get to the census because I've talked to 3 different people and they have 3 entirely different stories. So there's rarely just one path to flight. I also like the metaphor because I'm hoping that you all will go out and fly and do well and soar. Here are the things you are going to want to know when you're doing an informational interview. You're going to ask the person that you're talking to, like, what's your past job history? What did you do up until the job that you had? So we all did this at the beginning where we talked about, I went to grad school, here's the path I had, and so forth. So you're trying to get a sense of who they have been over their career. Then you want to know, like, what is it you do now? What does the day-to-day look like working for Universal Music Group or a senator and doing policy work there, or helping to design and execute the largest survey research experiment / activity in the world? What does that look like? What do you do day to day? How do you balance the day to day with the week to week and month to month, that sort of stuff? And it's always great to ask people about what's their plan for the future as well. Most people, I mean, I certainly am, and I think most of us are, most people are thinking about what the next move is going to be, even if they're not executing yet. You know, if you ask me, mine is like, okay, I've done policy, I really like it. Now I'd really like to go into the think tank world. I have think tanks I'm looking at, I have people I'm talking to. There are reasons why I want to do this. Here's the kind of stuff I want to do. But ask people about their future plans. I think it's helpful because you'll see the trajectory that people envision based on where they are, but it also gives you some ideas of where, you know, once you get to where that person is or on their road, where might that eventually lead? What are some of the possibilities? It's never a bad idea. You don't have to if it's uncomfortable, but asking people how you apply for such a job. Some processes are very formal and some are very informal. And just so ask it and make clear you're not asking for a job, but it's okay to ask and say, like, how formally did you end up in that? You're going to find out that I think if you do an informational interview, especially from academia, most of the world is a much less formal place than the APSA job listings. And the APSA job listings and most academic jobs are almost about as formal and structured as you can get. And that's not how most of this works. And most of all, what you want to do is figure out what you want to know from this person. Be willing to be flexible in the interview. You do not have to cover all of these areas plus any more you can think of. This is really about trying to figure out what you want and what this person can sort of most help you to learn. Because again, the point of doing all of this is you're there to learn something. So figure out what you want and go from there. So how do I ask for one? We've talked a little bit about this, but the first thing you've got to actually do is ask. I wrote down something Menna said there that is a good reminder to me. Like, I've been looking at some job boards and some places that I'd like to work, and her reminder of, if you're waiting for a job to be posted, you probably already missed some of the opportunity. You know, you're right, which means I need to mail that person up and just talk about, hey, what's it like to work at your institute? Mail, call, DM. A lot of people really do intend to get back to you more quickly than they do. I always tell people, including constituents who come in, mail me 2 or 3 times. I am not ignoring you because I want to ignore you. There's almost no one that I would do that to. It's mostly that, like, you mailed me on a Wednesday and something was exploding and I was just dealing with it, and it might take me a week to go back through and start sifting out my email again. So mail me again. I'm never going to be hurt. I will apologize to you, at least for my part, because I like to get back to people as soon as I can. Tell me why you want to talk to me. What's your background? What'd you like to learn? It doesn't have to be very long. Like, again, a short email is going to do better than a long email. Generally, my inclination at least is if the person asks and there's some reasonable reason why they want to talk to me, I'm going to try to say yes. If you're a complete stranger, you're going to be a little lower priority than if you say, like, oh, I know so-and-so whom you also know. Oh, okay, that helps. Or if we have a similar background, that sort of thing. Like I said before, mention any connections you've got. This is extremely important in especially like government work, DC work, more than you would think. I'll pop these into the chat box, but I pulled some of this from a an interesting, it's a math science Twitter and blog that I've seen out there. She's a mathematical or no scientific writer, but she had a good guide to informational interviews that is a nice infographic. And it is not actually as stressful as it sounds. I had one essentially yesterday that was sort of a conversation about all things, but it was just, honestly, it was getting to know a colleague and saying, well, how did you get to where you are? So it was part informational interview and it was part social. A lot of these, I think, end up being those sorts of things. I'd probably say don't plan for more than about 30 to 45 minutes most of the time. That's about the biggest amount of time that people are probably going to be able to give you. So I'll stop there. If people have got questions, I'm happy. And I'll also pop these sites into the chat.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that, Nathan. Just fabulous. There are a couple of questions that have come up, and so I'm just going to throw them out. I'm going to kind of blend a couple questions into one because we only have 10 minutes left. But I want to talk about, that sort of online application. Even though we're hoping to get, jobs or positions other ways, at the same time, most people are not going to stop with they're going to continue doing online applications, for these jobs that are posted and try and network at the same time. And so the cover letter is always a tricky thing. So I'm looking for any of you, that have advice about cover letters. And, oftentimes PhDs are considered overqualified, especially for these online job postings. And so not just the cover letter, but how do you address, how do you say, don't tell me I'm overqualified? How do you add that in, or should you even add that into a cover letter to avoid someone not hiring you because of that? Nathan.
This is a quick two-finger on the overqualified. I'm not sure how to answer the larger question. I can tell you that sometimes the motivation behind it is they think, well, you're really, really qualified. And if I hire you, you're not going to be here for more than a year. You're going to leave after 6 months to a year after you get what you need out of this. And at least before the labor market entirely upended, a lot of, I think, employers and organizations wanted to make sure that their employees would be around, that the investment would pay them back. And I think there's a fear that PhDs, come in sort of overqualified for a position, which then allows them to move on more quickly. So one thing to maybe do is, insofar as you can begin to reassure people that, you're not just looking, I'm not going to tell you to lie, but try to reassure them that you are actually interested in the job or the position for its own sake, and that you're not there to use this as a stepping stone to the next thing and move up the scale there. I think that's behind a lot of what people say there. I think there are other motivations, and I don't know that I have a great response to it because I've never found one on my own, so I'll be interested to see what others say.
I'll just quickly add, first of all, every cover letter should be customized, brief. And if it is your number one position, you need to say that all the things in my career have led me to this position, which, is a marriage of everything they say, the job description. And what you want to do is position your skill set as an academic as an added bonus. So it's more I'm here for this job. This is actually what I've been doing, right? And you need to be strategic about that. And so it's you're coming with more. It's not that you're overqualified, but that your actual center of gravity is in the job, but you also bring this additional skill set. I know on the Hill, they say that all the time, because, they could be intimidated. They don't think you're going to stay. But I will say that
they also think we're too technical and weenie, that we're so focused in on tiny things,
right?
And that it's the old, you're a mile deep, but around here we're a mile wide and 2 inches deep, and they're just afraid that you have no capability to know anything besides your specialty, at least on the Hill.
Yeah, and so my last sentence, I'll turn over to Analía, is that it's less, the person who asked this question, it's becoming less of an issue for PhDs to enter the policy world. People get it now. There's a high demand on the Hill. You'll be one of a few, so that will be less of an issue for you. It'll be more important that you build your social capital outside of academia.
And just like to add a little bit more to that, and especially regarding what Nathan just mentioned, I think that part of the trick there is that it's an exchange, right? It's a give and take. Like, it's not just that you are, you know, like that you could be qualified for the job and you have, you know, every item that they ask for in the call. It's also that there is an interest for you to join in. And so, like, to be explicit of like how you're interested in it and like what's your growth or like learning opportunity in there. The way that I thought about it when I was going for the job in my current division was basically saying, you know, like I don't have that much background in this specific topic, but I am, you know, good at all these other things that you're looking for. And I am interested in applying these tools in a different setting. And so like in kind of like the mindset that I went with is, you know, I just graduated from a PhD. I'm a lifelong learner. Let me learn a new sector. And so like in that way, you kind of like create that pitch to sort of like explain that, yeah, you might be overqualified in certain ways, but you're also willing to learn and excited to learn in other ones that can actually very much serve the organization.
That is going to happen even if they don't tell you, right? Like the census. I only know another political scientist in my area, and we don't work together. It's just mathematicians, statisticians, demographers, psychologists. So I would say just keep trying. And another aspect that we haven't talked that much about is our academic institutions. How are they supporting our students for this process? And for example, if they are also telling them that they are not a good fit, you know, for practitioner jobs, and if they don't count, which is happening, right? If a person gets a job in academia, they count as a point for the specific department, but a person outside academia doesn't count. So we just need to keep, you know, I've seen a lot of movement in APSA, which is great for changing these mindsets. But I know as a student, you know, many of them are still navigating this stereotypical journey that your life is done after academia, and it's not true.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to close there. That is just really phenomenal. It is important, and it's something that should be happening in our institutions. You know, this last hall of the PhD is such a big part of your life, and we're not taking an approach, you know, to this sort of holistic approach. You know, when you commit that much, you have a passion, and you know, you have really have something to offer, and to just train someone for those years and just let them go is really sad. And so I agree that our institutions should really do more as far as fostering development in academia or outside of academia. It's really, really important. I just want to say thank you to all of you. You have incredible backgrounds, and you have lived incredible life journeys inside the country, coming from outside of the country with such differentiation of talents, that it has been my pleasure to speak with you all. And I have a feeling that those who were not here live, the buzzword is going to go around that this is the one to watch on video for APSA. You guys contributed so much, and I really appreciate all of your time. It takes time to do this, and I appreciate you taking out the time to help lift up other graduate students in the profession of political science. So thank you. There's lots of great information in the chat. So hopefully anybody online has copied that information. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. This has been great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice meeting everyone.